Billy Blue, my knight in shining brindle. Welcome to another episode of A Poet Reads to Write. Today, oh boy, today I am so proud of being a Jewish man. We live in a world where, I know the Jewish New York vote wasn't the only thing responsible for the election to mayor of Zoran Mumdani, but the Jewish New York vote certainly helped. And apparently, according to the pollsters, more than 67% of Jewish New Yorkers under the age of 45 voted number one for Zoran Mumdani. Oh, I am so proud. I wake up almost in a brave new world. There is hope. There's light on the hill. There's something for us to follow and to give us some succor, some nourishment. Oh, I feel fantastic today. My great-great-grandfather was the first rabbi to ever work in Australia, believe it or not. He migrated out to the colony of New South Wales, as it was then called, and he went, of course, straight to Sydney to minister to the burgeoning Jewish population of Sydney in that New South Wales colony. He arrived sometime just before 1850 and he died in 1880. He was the first rabbi and cantor to work in the great synagogue of Sydney and minister to Sydney's Jewish population. So he was my great-great-grandfather. And my grandfather was my dad's father was such a proud Jewish man. His Jewish heritage was everything to him. But it was my grandfather who converted to Christianity after some family troubles and problems. And my family now are very proud of their Christian Jewish heritage, which I will explore in a moment in this video. There you go. But I also, of course, have lots of heritage from Ireland, from the Scottish Highlands with Clan Gordon, and from around that Yorkshire region in England. I think my rabbi great-great-grandfather came to Australia from Yorkshire, somewhere up there, apparently. I really should look into it because it would be an interesting story. All right. So I'm feeling fantastic, jubilant today. This video is dedicated. It is dedicated to the new mayor of New York, Zoran Mumdani. Oh my goodness. You are such a champion. This video is dedicated to you. The hope of Jewish New Yorkers. Wow. What a world we live in today. All right. The point of this video is this wonderful UK writer, John Wyndham, the wonderful Daniela over there at Uncommon Reader. She has inspired me to get into sci-fi. I've been very, very resistant, very slow to get into sci-fi. As a kid at school, like most of us, I was assigned at one stage John Wyndham's The Day of the Triffids, and of course Aldous Huxley's Brave New World to read, and I couldn't make head nor tail of them. I didn't respond to them at all. My family are very simple, very loving, naive Baptist folk. And every year when I was a kid, so maybe from the age of 10 or 11, I don't know when I started doing this, and to my sort of early mid-teenage years, every year we went to our local Baptist church where we all fellowshipped. And every year there was this thing where we watched this Left Behind genre film. And oh my goodness, I don't know whether every film ended the same way, or just one particular film ended this way. And it seared itself into my poor pre-adolescent imagination. And I've never got over the image of it. All of those who were not taken up in the rapture, and I think I always knew I would miss out. I always asked the wrong questions, said the wrong things, thought about the wrong things. I think I always knew I was not going to be taken in the rapture. And so those who didn't get taken eventually, of course, would have to choose between the tattooed 666 of Satan and be marked forever by that mark of the beast, or the chopping block. And it was a literal chopping block. I remember this grotesque image as this small boy. I remember this terrifying image, this dystopic image of these young adults being led to a literal chopping block to be kneeled down over it, and somebody with a big axe comes down and takes their head off. And of course, that's where the movie ended. It had a horrific impact on this young child's imagination. It's not an image I've ever been able to move on from. And so for me, I've always had an allergic reaction to anything dystopic in particular. And of course, so much science fiction is in this context of dystopic explorations. And while I love dystopic fiction as an idea, and I think it's a really important genre, people like Margaret Atwood, they're incredibly important writers, deservedly so. I get the vision, the project. But for me, because of this background with these Left Behind genre films, I have just always been allergic to dystopia, which, as I said, often includes the whole of that sci-fi thing. Plus, as a little boy, I was just never into rockets, buttons, machines, technology. I was very unboyish, I suppose, in terms of those traditional gender type lines. And I always loved fantasy, anything to do with trees and growing things and animals, elves, hobbits. Oh my goodness, I was there right away. But anything to do with technology and rockets and space travel, and it just didn't tickle my fancy at all. Plus, I had this allergic reaction because of these Left Behind genre films. But the wonderful Daniela over there at Uncommon Reader, she has inspired me with a buddy read. And she gave me Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. And it was one of the most enjoyable things I've read in ages. Not a perfect book, but it was a wonderful, wonderful read. So much fun. And I did a video on that about a month ago. You can watch if you would like to, my review of Project Hail Mary. So Daniela has given me this impetus, this momentum to, put my toes in the water and see how I go. And about 5 or 6 months ago, Mum gave me a day out in Penrith. She looked after my Billy Blue, and I was able to get down to Penrith and go to a few bookshops and a few different things. And in a second-hand bookshop, there was this beautiful treasure from the Folio Society. And it's actually quite new. It's only, I think, been published by Folio in the last couple of years, maybe half a dozen years. I'm not sure. Can't remember the publication dates in this. But they did these wonderful 3 novels of John Wyndham in this beautiful little slipcase. You can see it's very attractive, lovely use of colour. And it's got in it The Day of the Triffids, The Midwich Cuckoos, and the Chrysalids. And I've just finished reading The Day of the Triffids to relive those boyhood adventures when I was assigned it to read at school, and to see how I would, what I would make of it now. You can see the books, they come out like this. Folio, not everything they do is perfect. You can see the slipcase is already starting to peel apart. So if it is only a few years old, it's not a very sturdy, well-made slipcase at all. I'm a bit disappointed with that. I guess I could buy some glue or something and see if I can reseal those 2 ends. I'm not sure whether you can see that, but it's not perfect. So it's not a particularly sturdy or beautiful slipcase. But anyway, the books themselves, look at this. They're all divided by this wonderful paper to stop the books from marking one another. Oh, Folio. You can see here you've got the Chrysalids. Marvellous use of colour, isn't it? Beautiful cover, I think. And here you've got the Midwich Cuckoos, which I'm going to be reading over the next month or two, and I can't wait. These are very dystopic, apparently. I've never read these ones before, so I'm really looking forward to getting into them. But look at the beautiful colour in those covers. They're beautiful, I think. But the actual point of this video, as I said, is the Day of the Triffids. Look at that beautiful cover. I think it's a marvellous use of colour. And look at the end papers. They're plain, so these are not deluxe limited edition books, so they didn't cost me an arm or a leg. But look at that. It's very simple end papers, but look at the colour. Just the vibrancy in that green. I think it's marvellous. Suggesting of the Triffids, I suppose. Here we get the first illustration, the green comets that take everyone's sight. This is very much a dystopic fiction, you know, where this thing, the green comets come one night and everybody who looks up into the sky at these comets goes blind. And then, of course, there is these adventure with these plants, these Triffids. It's got a wonderful introduction by Adam Roberts. You can see here as it keeps going on. The whole book is illustrated, typical from the Folio Society. You get these wonderful, as I said, this is not a limited deluxe edition, so you don't get double page spread illustrations at all, but you get these beautiful single page illustrations with marvellous use of colour. Look at that. I think it's lovely illustration technique. That's, of course, the hero, the protagonist of our book, young Bill, lying in the hospital. So, yes, it is fully illustrated. It's a beautiful book that just opens so beautifully in the hand. You can see again, that's a pretty horrific type image. All look very much sort of reminiscent with something you'd seen of World War II, isn't it? And of course, John Wyndham, he was such an interesting bloke. He apparently, you know, he did dabble as a young adult with socialism, even with communism, certainly pacifism, but he was very pragmatic in his adoption of these isms. So when World War II broke out, he did sign up straight away. And while he didn't apparently serve in a combat role, he served in a variety of communications and intelligence roles. But he did serve right through World War II. So he was an ex-serviceman. And it was after World War II that he wrote these incredible books. The Day of the Triffids was, I suppose, his great breakthrough novel. This was published first in 1951. And my goodness, I'm not sure from my distant memories what I made of it as a kid. I don't think I really enjoyed it. But we did have a pretty boring English teacher. And, you know, all you really did for English was read a book, do chapter summaries, and then answer these ridiculous close reading questions on points of grammar and spelling and things like that. Very tedious. So it was hardly surprising that I didn't really enjoy this book or make much, you know, headwind with it. But after I've read it now, oh, Daniela, I'm so pleased that you got me onto this little adventure with science fiction and, you know, see if I can overcome my horrors, these traumas that's in my poor little pre-adolescent brain from these Left Behind genre films. Can I slowly, you know, just put my toes in the waters and explore a little bit of dystopic and sci-fi literature? This has been an absolute hoot to read. This was easily as much fun as Project Hail Mary. I loved it. I had an absolute ball. Like Project Hail Mary, it's not perfect, but my goodness, it was a lot of fun to read. This book opens, it opens, believe it or not, the first quarter of the book, it almost reads like it's an Ian Fleming spy thriller adventure novel. You know, you've got all the dystopic paranoia, all the fears of what was happening in the old USSR behind the Iron Curtain. And you've got jet planes ducking, you know, with spies almost, industrial spies, commercial spies, ducking in and out of the Iron Curtain to see what's going on, because there's this idea that they've started to pioneer this new plant, which of course is really rich in an oil, which is even better than any oil that we currently know. You know, even in whatever oil, olive oil, it doesn't matter where the oil came from. It was going to be this new super oil that would completely transform commercial enterprises. And so these jet aeroplanes, almost with these commercial spies, are ducking in and out of the Iron Curtain to try and get samples, seeds of this new plant that they think is being commercially grown in the old USSR. And they want to bring it back to the West. And then, of course, one plane is shot out of the air. And, of course, they think that's maybe where the seeds were dispersed high up over the planet and was distributed over a large plane. And then, of course, Triffids started to grow everywhere. And they become, I'm not going to tell you too much about the Triffids. If you want to read this book, if you've never read it, I suspect, it's been turned into so many TV series and movies. I find it hard to believe that there's not anyone out there who's not very familiar with the concept behind this. But I won't do any spoilers to ruin it if you do want to read this book for the first time and you don't know anything about it. But the plants, I think they're a marvelous creation. It's interesting in this book, when the dystopic world begins, when everybody goes blind and then the world starts to be overtaken by these Triffids that have this sting on them that can kill a person, and then they can walk around and they can go and stand next to almost like a Komodo dragon. They sting their prey to death, and then they stand guard over the prey as the prey decomposes, because they're a plant, so they don't have mouths, they don't have teeth or anything, so they wait for the body to decompose, and then of course they can absorb it, almost as I said, like a Komodo dragon. They can absorb it into themselves, and that's how they grow. So they're these large, mobile, carnivorous plants. Each plant is about the size of a person, some a bit bigger, and they can move around at about the same pace as human walking pace. It's a really interesting idea. You can see John Wyndham just having an absolute hoot with this. It's a marvelous concept. I think he did a terrific job of imagining this dystopic world, of setting everything up, of then drawing in and focusing on this young couple who meet only because of this, dystopic beginnings, the ending of the world. And so this young couple get together, Bill, who is our main antagonist, and Josella, and they get together, of course, and then the novel very much becomes their story. It's an interesting book because when the end of the world has happened and there are so few survivors, 12 months, 2 years, when most people around the world have died and all cities are in decay and ruin, everything is just run into the ground. Of course, survivors, people who did for some reason didn't see these comets, so didn't go blind, and they team up sometimes with a few blind people. So they set up these small, if you like, communes trying to survive away from Triffids. And so you do have this in the first half of the book. There is this grand contest of ideas as these people start to get together to form new communities. What principles are these new communities going to be based on? Whether they're based on very much Christian values or religious values, or whether these new communities are going to be based on something quite else, which they think might be a better way of helping humankind survive the apocalypse. It's really interesting. There is this grand contest of ideas, of sociology, if you like, of ways of being communal, of living with one another, and what might give people the best chance of surviving into the future. I think John Wyndham could have done a better job at exploring this even more and really developing this contest of ideas, because it only happens very much in the background and it's quite transitory, really. This novel, it is only 250 pages long, so there is a real force of compression to it, and it does really focus very much, as I said, on the two main protagonists, Bill and Josella, and their future together, and the people who join them on their, if you like, future. So, there is a real compression to the narrative, and it makes the book even more, of course, entertaining. You really are turning the pages to see what's going to happen next. I think it's absolutely marvelous. It's a hoot to read. But I think Wyndham, he could have slowed down at some point and maybe thrashed out some of this a bit more and really looked into these different ways of establishing a community and the different principles, the foundations that, might make a community. successful into the future in this post-apocalyptic type context. He does do it a bit, but as I said, it's mainly hinted at. There's not really much there. It really does just focus on the two main protagonists. And that is very good. You know, it does give the novel a real force of momentum to it. It's a hoot to read. It's fantastic. But I think Wyndham could have thrashed these ideas out a bit more and made it even a more interesting, serious contest of ideas. But what he did was fantastic. Is it a perfect book? No. It was published in 1951, so I guess it is vintage sci-fi, really. And Wyndham does do a very good job, considering the book was published in 1951. You know, the way he does engage with the contest of ideas for communalism, for ways of living together, it is interesting. And it's not as though he's completely on the side of capitalism or, you know, conservatism or anything like that. He does consider even anarchism and different types of socialism, if you like, as being the best ways of bringing people together and allowing them to at least survive, if not flourish, in this post-apocalyptic context. But of course, the novel is published in 1951, and while Wyndham does a very good job, there are, because of its vintage lines, you know, in terms of some of the values in the book, it is a little bit unsettling for a modern day reader. In particular, Josella, who is this young, independent, mature, young adult woman. But the way she's described by Wyndham, you know, he's trying to give her that independence. He is searching towards this modern woman, if you like. You can see he is trying. But he can't help himself in the end. So it does read a bit, as I said, like an Ian Fleming novel with those sexist values. So Josella is also, you know, as well as being described as this young, very independent, quite powerful, forcefully minded young woman, she's also described by Wyndham as being a girl who prattles on with childish half disappointment. She chuckles all the way through the novel. You know, she chuckles and she giggles as she admits as she is the author of this book, Sex is My Adventure. And the book is very, you know, John Wyndham is very concerned with making it clear that even though she wrote this book and made a lot of money from it, it is a pretense, if you like, it's a persona. John Wyndham is very careful to protect her bodily purity, because I think that's, you know, meant to be protected for Bill. So, you know, John Wyndham goes out of his way to show that this persona of this brash, bold young woman who wrote this book about her adventures with sex, it is a persona. It's not real. She's actually maintained all of that bodily purity. It is quite jarring at times. And then there's another point in the novel where Josella is crying and her eyes are described as being wide and dark. And she says to Bill, "I'm frightened." And she came to him like a child for comfort. You know, can you imagine that being flipped around and Bill crying and coming to her like a child for comfort? It just doesn't work, does it, in this type of 1951 context? It is quite jarring to our way of looking at things. And then later on in the book, when Josella and Bill, you know, they do build up their own little commune, if you like, and they get these fences around this rural property to protect it from Triffids, to protect themselves from Triffids. And they have a combination of sighted people and blind people, you know, because they're doing their best to protect people, of course, to, you know, give everybody a hope for the future. Of course, they are our protagonists. And Josella and Bill have these ruminations on what it is they're trying to do. And they talk about the fact that if a herd creature loses the herd, he cannot hold on to reason. He is lost, most utterly and fearfully lost. And the novel really does, really successfully, I think, build into it this hunger for community. You know, in a post-apocalyptic world, when everything is broken down and being destroyed, where so much has been rubbed out, you know, the individuals that have survived, they want more. They want something, and they want something together. You know, we are social animals. We live best in community. And John Wyndham, I think, does a marvelous job of exploring this, of, really motivating these people to gather together and to somehow live together and help one another. It is really interesting. And Josella and Bill at one stage are talking about their children and grandchildren. And Josella asks Bill, this is really interesting. Josella asks Bill, do you think we should be justified in starting a myth to help explain how all this happened? A story of a world that was horribly clever, but so wicked that it had to be destroyed. Something like the flood myth all over again. And I think asking questions like this are so interesting. What is it that you need to have as a foundation to build a new type of community on inside this post-apocalyptic world? Because many people, like Bill, are certain that these comets, these green comets that sent everyone blind one night, they weren't comets, they weren't natural at all. They were living in a world post-1951 where nations, through fear and paranoia and also militarism and aggression, let's face it, were putting up these satellites, these military satellites that were capable of spreading all sorts of things. And it was all very top secret. So it was very hard to imagine what was actually going on with all these satellites that were going up and moving around our planet. And of course, the beginnings of nuclear warfare and, all of this paranoia, this Cold War fear. And so that's very much the context that all of this happens in. So Bill always thought that this blindness episode was not natural at all. They weren't natural green comets. He always thought it had something to do with these military satellites. And he never says whether it was the old USSR, communist China, or whether it was in fact, the West. Because they also had military grade satellites. The US, Britain, France, Germany, they all were all up to it. And very cleverly, John Wyndham puts these ideas out there, but he doesn't actually go into bat for which side he thought caused it. All we know is that this catastrophe, which probably happened as a mistake, something that was put up there as a military grade satellite, but it got out of control and it caused this apocalypse. It's really interesting the way Wyndham does it. It's quite clever. And again, coming back to the role of gender in 1951, at the end of the novel, Bill, because they're about to leave their little colony and they're going to join up with a bigger mob, and they think that might give them better hopes for the future in terms of their children and their grandchildren, to join a bigger community that they feel some sense of wholeness with. And the other thing that's good about this novel is, no community, they realize that too, no community is perfect. So when Bill and Josella are looking around for a bigger community to join, to throw in their lot with, they know straight away that they're never going to find the perfect community. It's always going to be about compromise. And you just want to join a community where the compromises you make, are compromises you can live with. It's really interesting the way Wyndham does it, that pragmatism, that very English pragmatic style or tone of voice. I really admire it. It's really interesting. But when they're about to do this, Bill gets a bit depressed because he hasn't been able to particularly, make it on his own. He did really, I think, want to live on his own with his children and grandchildren and be his own little patriarch, maybe. And he's feeling a little bit depressed about having to go to a larger group of people and leave everything behind that they've, spent so many years building up. And Josella says to him, "Oh, darling, don't. A knight errant isn't futile. You've fought for us all and you've kept the dragons away." It's a wonderful sentiment. But can you imagine him saying that to her, that she was the knight errant? She had done all of this. Because in fact, of course, every single day, Josella has done as much as Bill. She's done everything just the same. So why isn't she praised as being the knight errant? It is full of 1951 values, particularly when it comes to gender. But I think it is a marvelous book. I would really recommend it to you. It's not a perfect book, but it is a hell of a lot of fun. It's absolutely fabulous. John Wyndham, The Day of the Triffids. Daniela, thank you for getting me on this journey with sci-fi and dystopia, post-apocalyptic literature. I'm having a ball and I intend to read more. On my future reading horizon, I certainly have some more John Wyndham. Thank you and bye for now.